Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
The woman dragged her bags toward her mother's country house, under the laughter of her husband and his mistress, who had taken everything from her. But when she pushed open the rickety gate, she couldn't believe her eyes. There, waiting for her was. Neither shouting nor slamming doors could drown out the piercing laughter echoing from the yard. Regina paused for a moment at the front door, struggling to keep her balance with two heavy checkered bags. Somewhere inside, her heart was pounding wildly, and in her ears still rang the mocking laughter of her husband and his mistress. She had clearly heard it just a minute ago when she was leaving the apartment, her home no longer hers. With one quick elbow movement, she pushed the door open wider, trying to stay balanced and not spill her belongings onto the dirty floor. But the cruel words that followed her out, echoing in her mind, wouldn't go away. "That's it, leave," said Santiago, her 35-year-old husband, loudly as she took her final step out. "Take your rags and don't you dare come back." Where did all that coldness and cruelty come from? Usually reserved, he now seemed fired up with emotion for his new flame, who leaned against the kitchen doorway, a sly smile on her painted lips. The curled strands of her blonde hair didn't even twitch when Regina turned to look at her. Girl or young woman, Regina didn't know her exact age, but she looked several years younger and smirked as if doing Regina a huge favor by letting her take her things. Regina looked at Santiago through a veil of tears. This was the man she had married 5 years ago, once certain he could love and protect his family. She had only been 22 at the time of the wedding. A big celebration, friends, family, tables full of food, laughter. She'd felt like the happiest girl in the world. And now she was seeing indifference on his face, escalating into aggression, and the mocking glint in the eyes of a stranger who had taken her place. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Regina walked toward the elevator without looking back, but, as often happened that month, the elevator wasn't working. The neighbor from the first floor always threatened to complain to the housing authority, but nothing ever came of it. She had to go down the stairs on foot. 3 flights felt like an endless road. With each step, her heart pounded harder, her chest tightening with suffocating pressure. She closed her eyes, trying not to cry right there on the stairs, but the tears came anyway, silent and bitter. They streamed down her cheeks and dripped onto the handles of her bags, soaking their faded red and blue checkered fabric. The laughter of her husband and his mistress now sounded behind her, as if taunting her. She imagined they had already closed the door and gone back to their conversation, maybe even opened a bottle of wine to celebrate their new life. Regina, meanwhile, felt as if she'd lost not just her apartment and belongings, but the very ground under her feet. She had no strength to scream, no energy to fight, no choice but to leave. Somewhere deep inside, a faint flicker of resistance still burned, but pain and resentment overwhelmed it. When Regina finally stepped outside, the air felt sharp, almost burning. She pressed both bags against her thighs to avoid holding them entirely with her arms. She had no strength left. She paused, wondering where to go, what to do, but the answer came by itself. She had no money for a hotel, and her savings were practically gone. Santiago had removed her from their joint bank account, and what little she had wouldn't last more than a couple of days in the city. She didn't want to call her mother. Their relationship had been strained since school, constant reproaches, judgment, disappointment that Regina hadn't achieved more. But there was the country house. Old, yes, but at least it was a roof over her head for the night. Her mother now lived in another city, scraping by for the 3rd year working as a caregiver for a distant relative. She rented out her apartment to have some stable income. The country house had been left abandoned. That was where Regina headed. The taxi driver standing near the building eyed the young woman with overstuffed bags curiously. A couple of them called out, offering help. But Regina barely had any money left. She searched her jacket pocket, found her wallet, just a couple of bills and some coins. Enough for a bus ticket, thankfully. But the bus stop was several blocks away, and the bags felt unbearably heavy. Still, there was no choice. Regina clenched her teeth and started walking. "Miss, I can at least drive you to the stop for free," one taxi driver shouted, realizing she couldn't pay. But Regina just shook her head. Pride and hurt mingled inside her. She didn't want anyone's pity. She felt that if someone helped her now, she'd fall apart completely. And she kept telling herself, "No, hold on. You can do this. Just keep going. It'll be okay." As she walked, she thought about how just 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined such an ending. Yes, the marriage had problems. Santiago started coming home later, speaking less, avoiding conversations about the future or having children. But Regina had believed it was all fixable, a temporary crisis. There had been warning signs, odd glances, short phone calls, deleted messages. But she didn't want to believe the worst. Only a month ago did everything come to light. He confessed. "You know, I've fallen in love with someone else. She gives me what you stopped giving me." What exactly, support, admiration, understanding, Santiago couldn't explain. But he blamed Regina, saying he married one woman and ended up with another. That hurt the most. She cried for days, trying to figure out where she had gone wrong. But Santiago had made up his mind. He wanted a new life. It took her several weeks to fully realize he was going to kick her out of the apartment, which, incidentally, was in his name. He'd inherited it from his grandmother. At the bus stop, Regina caught her breath and wiped her tears. People rushed past her, some with children, some alone and lost in thought. No one paid her much attention. She wished she could disappear, turn back time, stop everything, but reality had other plans. When the bus arrived, she barely managed to heave her bags onto the step, climbed into the cabin, paid the fare, and took a window seat, trying to calm the shaking in her hands. Her whole life now felt broken, derailed. After arriving at the main station, she switched to a regional bus headed toward the village where the country house was. There was a long wait, nearly an hour. She placed her bags on the bench and sat beside them, avoiding eye contact with the people passing by, happy, busy, or simply at peace. Unlike her. The thought crossed her mind, maybe I should call Mom? But then she remembered their last conversations. When her mother found out Santiago had left her, she immediately blamed Regina. Men always leave when they don't get the attention they need. You should have held on to him. Those words had cut deeply. Regina had hoped her mother would support her, but instead, she had ended up alone in that too. The hour dragged on painfully, but eventually the bus pulled into the platform. Regina grabbed her bags again, pain shooting through her lower back and shoulders. She shoved one bag into the aisle, then the other. A gray-haired conductor helped her haul them down the narrow corridor while passengers grumbled about the space being blocked. She thanked him quietly and sat down by the window. The road to her mother's house was long. The city faded behind her. The bus rattled along country roads. Fields, trees, and the occasional glowing gas station or roadside cafe flickered by. Regina stared blankly out the window, thinking about what to do next. Find a job in town? She had a degree in management, but finding work was hard, especially without a home. She could stay at the house for a bit, though it was far from comfortable, no hot water, a wood-burning stove, spotty electricity, and a leaky roof. Still, it was her only option. Maybe I can get a job in the nearest village, in a shop or cafe, just to start making some money, she thought. The bus jolted to a stop, and Regina almost flew into the seat in front of her. Sorry, the driver called out to someone outside. A few passengers muttered their annoyance. Regina sighed and looked at her watch, 30 minutes until her stop. She spent the time trying to organize her thoughts. A plan, I need a plan, she told herself. Maybe this is the moment I need to pull myself together and start rebuilding my life. When the bus finally reached the small village stop, no one else got off. The conductor glanced at her bags and asked, "Miss, is someone picking you up? Need a hand?" "No, thank you," Regina replied, forcing a smile as she hoisted her heavy bags. "I've got it." Her legs trembled with exhaustion. She walked along the country road, which had been badly torn up by tractors and the occasional passing vehicle. In some places, large puddles and mud forced her to take detours to avoid sinking ankle deep. On the horizon, the familiar outlines of old village houses came into view. Some were still inhabited, but many stood abandoned. The area felt quiet, too quiet after the constant noise of the city. But Regina didn't feel peace. Instead, there was a sense of anxiety mixed with sorrow. At last, she saw the familiar fence with its leaning pickets. The gate had sagged so badly it clearly hadn't been opened in a long time, so Regina entered through the small, peeling side gate. As she pushed it, it creaked loudly, and she slipped into the yard. To her dismay, everything had become overgrown with weeds and bushes over the winter and spring. Her mother used to plant flowers here, used to lay down stone tiles, but in recent years, no one had maintained the garden. Regina dropped her bags onto the weed-covered path and straightened up, rubbing her aching shoulders. Tears of despair welled in her eyes. This was her new home, an old summer house with peeling paint on the walls, a sloping roof that she knew leaked in 3 places, a shed that smelled of damp, and a stack of firewood under a shelter that was surely soaked and useless now. This is where I'm supposed to live? Seriously, she thought, but there were no other options. She scanned the yard and suddenly stopped. A black car was parked near the porch. Not an expensive one, an old Ford, but it looked well maintained. Who could that be? A worrying thought flashed through her mind. The neighbors probably hadn't been around in a while, and yet here was a car. Could it be some uninvited guest who knew the house was empty and decided to squat? Her heart began to race. She froze, trying to listen for any sign of movement inside. Then, from behind the house, a man appeared, tall, in his mid-30s, wearing work overalls and holding some tools. Oh! He noticed Regina and raised a hand in greeting. You must be Regina? She recoiled in surprise. She had no idea who this man was or how he knew her name. Seeing her confusion, the man quickly introduced himself. My name's Sebastian. I'm your mom's neighbor out here, though my place is at the far end of the street. We've spoken a few times. She asked me to take care of a few things around the house while she's away. I thought I'd be here alone. Sorry if I scared you. Regina stayed frozen in place, watching him warily. A neighbor? She didn't remember her mother ever mentioning any close contact with neighbors. But maybe her mother had changed things in her life without telling her. That would explain it. Sebastian noticed the heavy bags and came over to help. Regina hesitated but eventually handed him one, which he lifted effortlessly. Sorry to barge in like this, he said, noticing her uneasy expression, but I really am just doing a bit of work here. Your mom asked me to fix the roof, maybe patch up the fence. She said her daughter might have to stay here for a while, and the place wasn't in great shape. Regina's heart sank. So her mother did know her daughter might end up here. Yet she hadn't called, hadn't offered support. Just hired some neighbor to prepare the house. The realization filled Regina with mixed emotions, relief that someone had tried to make the place livable, and pain that her mother had once again acted without trying to understand her. Come inside, Sebastian said. I'll show you what I've done so far. I patched the roof a bit, no idea how well it'll hold. The fence, well, honestly, it's hopeless. Easier to build a new one than fix that mess. Regina stepped onto the porch and suddenly felt her knees shake. She was standing only by sheer willpower after the long trip and emotional turmoil. Sebastian set the bag down by the door and turned to her. Hey, are you okay? She shook her head, and tears spilled down her cheeks. She had reached her limit. Here, in the rural house where she'd been driven by a life that no longer wanted her, she let the despair take over. Everything crashed down: betrayal, shame, anger, uncertainty. Sebastian looked lost for words, then gently touched her elbow. Can I get you some water? Maybe hot tea? I've got a thermos in the car. I had a feeling I might be here a while. Regina looked at him, realizing he was a complete stranger, and yet in this moment, he was kinder than anyone had been to her in days. She nodded, covering her face with one hand to stem the tears. Thank you. I'm just very tired. Sebastian said nothing more. He quickly walked to the car and came back with a thermos and a plastic cup. Regina sat on the top step of the porch, trying to steady her breath. Sebastian poured her some tea. It had a warm, herbal aroma. She took a sip, feeling the bitter warmth slide down into her stomach, bringing a slight sense of relief. For a few minutes, they sat in silence. Sebastian didn't pressure her, didn't ask questions. But Regina felt conflicted. She wanted to open up, yet didn't know if she should. The quiet broke when he suddenly noticed a scratch on her palm. "Hey, look at this," he said, gently touching her hand. "You hurt yourself?" Regina glanced down at her hand and remembered catching it on a sharp metal corner while dragging the bags. She hadn't even noticed it until now, but suddenly she felt the sting. Sebastian stood up and went back to the car for a first aid kit. He returned with hydrogen peroxide, cotton, and a bandage. "Give me your hand," he said gently, and cleaned and dressed the wound. "Better to be safe. You never know." Regina was caught off guard by the simple act of care. Not only was this man helping her, but he was doing so with quiet, natural kindness. She wasn't ready to feel gratitude yet, buried under the weight of her problems, but she felt his warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. "It didn't even occur to me to look for a bandage in my bag. Everything's just going wrong today." "Don't mention it," Sebastian shrugged. "Let me help you get your things inside. It's already getting late. Tomorrow we can clean up and see what can be fixed to make it a bit more comfortable." She nodded, noticing the daylight was fading fast. She didn't even have the energy to sort through her things. They went into the house. The smell of damp and mustiness hit her at once. "Yeah, with no ventilation or heating, the place got pretty stale," Sebastian said, opening windows to let some air in. Regina looked around. Dust. Old wallpaper stained in the corners. The linoleum was warped. As a child, she used to think this little cottage was magical, a place for summer days with her mom. That felt like a lifetime ago. "I'll head up to the attic to check the roof," Sebastian said, pulling a flashlight from his pocket. "Make yourself at home." "Okay," she replied, still unsure where anything was. "Thanks." "Really?" He just nodded and disappeared into the hallway leading to the attic stairs. Alone now, Regina collapsed onto the creaky old sofa in the corner. The long journey and stress had left her eyelids heavy. She knew she should at least clean the room, lay out some bedding, but she had no strength left. "Just 5 minutes to rest, then I'll get to it," she thought, but exhaustion won. Sleep came quickly, like a plunge. Images flickered in her mind, Santiago smiling as he held his mistress's hand, the empty apartment, her mother's disapproving face. She felt like she was sinking into a pit of failures and pain, until everything went still, and she fell into a dark, sticky sleep. When Regina opened her eyes again, it was already night. A dim bulb glowed under the ceiling. Sebastian must have turned it on. The air smelled slightly fresher. Opening the windows had helped, but the house still felt damp. She realized someone had covered her with a blanket. Sitting up, she saw a plate of sandwiches and a mug, likely filled with tea, on the table beside her. Sebastian must have left it, she thought. Confirming her suspicion, footsteps sounded from the hallway, and Sebastian entered the room, wiping his hands with a rag. "Oh, you're awake. Sorry if I disturbed you. I was just getting ready to leave. It's late, and you need to rest too. I think that's enough work for today." Still not fully awake, Regina rubbed her eyes and asked in a muffled voice, "You covered me and made food?" He looked slightly embarrassed. "Well, yeah. You fell asleep. I couldn't just leave you here on a cold couch in silence. And you need to eat, otherwise tomorrow you'll be totally out of energy." Regina felt awkward. He had already spent the day fixing the roof and doing other repairs, and now he'd also made sure she had something to eat. She knew she should thank him, offer something in return, but aside from thank you, she had nothing to give. She was at her lowest, the most helpless she'd ever been. Thank you, she said softly, gripping the now lukewarm mug of tea. I'm really grateful. I don't know how I can repay you. Don't worry about it, Sebastian waved her off. Your mom pays me well for the work, though I told her I'd come by when I could, not all the time. I've got my own job too. But the roof's not leaking anymore. I did a temporary fix. Tomorrow I'll finish it properly. I'll wrap up the fence as well, at least so it closes properly. I can help get new materials too if you decide to replace it entirely, but that's up to you. Regina nodded. She felt uncomfortable just sitting there sleeping and eating while someone else did all the work, but Sebastian clearly wasn't expecting anything beyond what he'd agreed on. I'll leave you my number, he said, pulling out his phone. Call me if anything comes up. I'll be back early tomorrow to see what else needs doing. She pulled her own phone from her bag, switched it on, and began entering the contact. The screen flickered, battery nearly dead. Santiago had cut her off from the joint account, which meant her phone plan might soon be suspended too. That bitter thought crossed her mind. But for now, the phone still worked, and she could save the number. All right. Thank you, she repeated, getting up from the couch. She felt like she'd said thank you far too many times in just a few minutes, but she didn't know how else to express her gratitude. I'll get up early too tomorrow, at least I can help with something. Deal. See you tomorrow, Sebastian said, heading to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. Just be careful, the stove is old. I don't know what condition the gas cylinders are in. I haven't hooked up the gas yet since the pipes need checking. You can use the electric hot plate, it should be in the cupboard, unless it's broken. I haven't checked it yet. With that, he left, and Regina was alone again. She stood there, hugging the blanket, feeling a strange mix of emotions begin to stir. The betrayal by her husband, the lack of support from her mother still stung deeply, but there was something warm, even comforting, in Sebastian's simple kindness. Maybe there are still people in this world who care, she thought. She finished the cold tea and slowly chewed a sandwich, realizing she hadn't eaten all day. The weariness returned, but now she at least needed to lay out something on the couch. From her bag she took out an old blanket and a sheet, the only things she'd managed to grab when Santiago kicked her out. She didn't have a duvet, so the blanket would have to do. Tomorrow, she'd try to find something in the attic among her grandmother's old belongings. Maybe something had survived. That's what she did. She made the couch as best she could, pulled on a warmer sweater, and lay down, listening to the silence outside. In the city, there were always cars, neighbors stomping, elevators humming. Here, there was complete stillness, only the creaking of wood in the wind and the rustle of grass. The silence was both oppressive and calming. Before long, Regina drifted into a restless sleep, full of fragmented memories of recent events. She dreamed of the apartment now taken over by Santiago and his mistress. She dreamed she was banging on locked doors, trying in vain to reclaim her old life. Morning greeted her not with sunbeams, but with a dull gray light filtering through the dirty, long unwashed windows. Regina sat up on the couch, her back aching from the springs that had pressed into her all night. She shuffled to the tiny kitchen sink. The tap water ran rusty, but it was better than nothing, at least she could wash her face. She glanced at her reflection in the small mirror, puffy eyes, messy hair, a worn-out expression. She looked not great. But she had no choice, it was time to pull herself together. Throwing on her jacket, she stepped out into the yard. Last night she hadn't had time to properly take in her surroundings. The yard was in total disrepair. Dry stalks poked up here and there, weeds covered everything underfoot. The shed stood off to the side, its roof sagging too. But in the corner of the yard, the old bench still stood, the one where she and her mother used to eat watermelon on summer days. It was chipped and weathered now, but the memories rushed back. She remembered her mother laughing while Regina spit watermelon seeds into her palm. Back then, their bond had felt simple and warm. Now, everything was cracked, the bench and their relationship. That sudden wave of nostalgia didn't comfort her, it brought a fresh wave of sorrow. but she clenched her fists and whispered, "Enough. Time to act. First things first, clean up the trash, air out the house." Sitting idle only deepened the despair. Regina went back inside, took out a trash bag, an old rag, managed to find a basin to fill with water for mopping, wiped away dust, though the rag quickly turned into a filthy mess. Still, the room started looking a little less gloomy. Then she unpacked her things, folded clothes onto a chair, hung a few dresses on a rusty hook. Some towels and bedding went into a small cupboard that had survived since her grandmother's time. The work was hard, but it helped her stop thinking about the past. About an hour later, the sound of an engine approached. The black Ford pulled into the yard, and Sebastian stepped out, carrying a box. "Morning," he said as he walked toward the house. "How did you sleep?" Regina smiled faintly. She felt awkward. How was she supposed to answer? The night had been rough, sleep restless. "I slept as well as I could," she replied vaguely. "You're here early." "Well, lots to do." "Told you, still gotta finish the roof." "Oh, and I brought you a new electric kettle. I saw your old one yesterday, it's broken. It's been sitting here and used for years. You'll need hot water, so, here." He handed her the box. Regina glanced at it, read the brand name, and realized it was a fairly expensive model. She wanted to refuse, but Sebastian noticed her hesitation. "Consider it a gift. Your mom pays me not just for the repairs but to help make the house livable. The kettle's part of that. Besides, it'll be useful for me too, if I want a cup of tea." She gave a shy smile. "Thank you." "All right then," he said, waving it off. "Come show me how things are going. What have you managed to get done?" "I'll grab my tools. Today I'll deal with the fence and check out that gas cylinder. I might have a buddy who can inspect the pipeline." They walked out to the yard. Regina, trying to look busy, started gathering dry branches and weeds into a pile. Sebastian stood by the fence, testing the boards to see which could be salvaged and which would need to be replaced. At that moment, a strange sound interrupted the quiet. Regina thought she heard someone call her name. "Regina," came a voice from beyond the fence. She turned and saw a woman in her 50s, likely a neighbor from the adjacent property. The woman was peering through a gap in the fence, trying to see what was happening. "Yes, hello," Regina responded automatically, not knowing who she was. The neighbor quickly made her way around the fence and appeared at the gate. Slightly plump, with graying hair, her face looked kind. In her hands, she held a plastic bowl filled with what looked like homemade pastries. "You must be Pamela's daughter, right? I'm Aunt Paulina, remember me? I used to live 2 houses down. Your mother and I used to help each other out when you were little." Regina tried to recall, but the memories from childhood were vague. "Hello, Aunt Paulina," she said, feeling a bit of warmth, as the neighbor had clearly come with friendly intentions. "Sorry, I don't really remember. It's been so many years." "Oh, that's all right," the woman waved her hand dismissively. "I saw lights on in the house and Sebastian working out here, so I figured you'd arrived. Thought I'd bring over some pastries, just made them fresh. Figured you probably haven't had time to cook, with all the work around the house." Regina looked at the bowl of pastries. The smell of potatoes and fried onions drifted up, making her mouth water. She realized she'd barely eaten since morning and was already burning through a lot of energy. "Thank you so much," she said, accepting the bowl. "That's really thoughtful of you." "Go ahead, enjoy," Aunt Paulina said, then looked over and spotted Sebastian. "You're still at it? I thought you left yesterday and weren't coming back." Sebastian smirked. "Yeah, sure, not coming back. There's still plenty to do, roof, fence, might even get the gas connected." "Well, that's good of you. You'll help Regina settle in, then, now that she's here alone, without her mom." The word alone struck something inside Regina. "Alone," she repeated to herself. Yes, she was now truly alone in her troubles. Her husband had turned his back, her mother was in another city, and here she was, surrounded only by strangers who were voluntarily offering help. Aunt Paulina said her goodbyes and wished them luck before leaving. Regina, meanwhile, thanked Sebastian again for the kettle and headed into the house to fetch some cups so they could have tea with the pastries. He nodded and said, "Pour me one too, I'll finish up here with the fence." 5 minutes later, they were sitting at a folding table Sebastian had brought out from the shed and set up near the porch. Regina laid out the pastries on a plate and poured the tea. The moment felt almost cozy, if not for the heavy thoughts that kept reminding her why she was here. "So," Sebastian said between sips, "what's your plan? How long do you think you'll stay?" Regina lowered her gaze. The question was too difficult. She didn't know the answer herself. "I'm not sure," she began hesitantly. "I'll stay for now. I need to find a job, an apartment. I don't have much money, and it's impossible to pay rent when you're unemployed. Maybe I'll find something in the village or the nearest town." Sebastian nodded, listening calmly. "I get it. I could ask around. Maybe someone needs help with housework, a shop, or even on the farm. There's one nearby, they're always looking for workers. It's hard work, though." Regina gave a weary smile. "Hard is putting it mildly. I spent my whole life trying to build a career in the city. Amazing how fast things can change." "What kind of career did you have?" Sebastian asked gently, not wanting to pry but curious. "I was a manager, not as fancy as it sounds. Mostly I worked in the office, dealt with documentation, contracts. It was a small company. Santiago, my husband, or I guess my ex now," she paused, the word ex painful to say. "He was a lawyer, fairly successful, but lately he worked freelance. Then he met someone new. And, well, here we are." She hadn't expected to say all that so quickly and bluntly, but clearly the tension inside her needed a release. Sebastian listened, seeming to absorb the information. "I see. I'm sorry. But you've got to move forward." "Yeah, I know," Regina replied, looking away. "Are you married?" she asked back, quietly. "Used to be," he said briefly. "My son lives with his mom in the city. We split a couple of years ago, no big drama, just didn't get along anymore. But he visits, and I try to support him, help financially." "I understand," Regina said quietly, not wanting to ask more. She didn't like it when people pressed her about personal things. They finished the pastries in silence. The tension gradually faded, and Regina felt something spark inside her, small, but close to hope. Maybe she hadn't fallen into a total void after all. At least there were kind people around, Aunt Paulina, Sebastian. Maybe there really is light at the end of the tunnel, she thought. "All right," Sebastian stood up from the table. "Thanks for the tea. I'll get back to the fence. Call me if you need anything." Regina went inside to continue cleaning, but she was startled a short while later by a loud cracking sound. She ran outside. Sebastian was wiping sweat from his forehead, a few boards lay scattered nearby, and the fence looked even more dismantled than before. "It's okay," he said, seeing her alarmed face. "That was the plan. Had to pull out the rotten boards before putting in new ones. You see how fragile everything is." Regina let out a breath of relief. The day passed in busy work. Sebastian repaired the fence and checked the roof again, while Regina washed windows, scrubbed away old grime, and laid blankets out in the sun to air them. By evening, Sebastian left, promising to return in a few days with supplies to work on the gas line. Regina was alone again, and silence fell over the yard. She went inside and collapsed onto the couch, feeling a pleasant kind of fatigue. The work had helped, at least for a while, to push the past from her mind. But once alone, the image of Santiago resurfaced again. How did this happen? Is it really over? She asked herself. But deep down she knew he had made his choice. He had clearly shown he no longer wanted to be with her. There was no point in hoping he'd come back. Summoning her resolve, she decided to call her mother. She wanted to ask what the deal was with Sebastian and why she hadn't told Regina how she planned to help. But her phone had no signal. Reception here was unstable. Sometimes you had to go outside or climb a hill. But it was already dark, and she didn't feel like going out. She decided to call in the morning when she went to the store. Hopefully, there'd be a shop somewhere in the village. And so she did. The next morning she got up early, brushed her teeth, freshened up a little, and left the property, heading toward the village square, or what passed for one near the old community hall. She remembered there used to be a store there. After walking about 200 meters, she spotted the small one-story building with a sign reading groceries. There was almost no one around, just the occasional passing car. She went inside and bought bread, milk, some grains, and oil. With so little money, she had to stick to the essentials. Outside the store, she noticed her phone had signal. She dialed her mother's number. "Yes, sweetie," her mother's voice came through. "Everything all right?" Regina hesitated, unsure where to begin. She had so many questions, but the words caught in her throat. "Hi, Mom. I've been at the country house for 2 days now. How are you?" "I'm okay. Getting things done." "Why? Everything all right over there? Is Sebastian doing the repairs? He said he talked to you." Regina sighed quietly. That tone again, like everything was being handled behind her back. "Yes, he fixed the roof, and he's working on the fence. He said it was your idea. Thanks for the help, but why didn't you tell me anything directly?" "I didn't see the point," her mother replied evenly. "You've got your own stuff going on. I just wanted the house ready for when you got there, but I didn't know when that would be. Sebastian was already hired for repairs, so I figured let him handle it. I'm paying him. He's a good, reliable worker." Her mother's voice carried the usual calmness, even coldness, as if she didn't understand how much her daughter was hurting. "And you? Did you know I might end up coming here because of what happened with Santiago?" "Of course I knew. You think Santiago didn't call me?" "He did, actually, told me you two were fighting and that you didn't want to accept certain things. I stayed out of it. You're both adults. But now you've decided to stay at the country house. Fine. It's better than sleeping on the street." Regina gripped her phone, feeling something boil up inside her. Her mother treated the fact that her daughter had lost her home and husband as a given. And it seemed she didn't particularly sympathize, just acknowledged it as a fact. "Mom, things are really hard for me right now," she said quietly, a lump in her throat. "I was hoping you'd understand, support me, and instead—" "Support you," her mother cut in. "Sweetheart, all I can say is, get a grip. Find a proper job, save some money, live in a way that you don't rely on anyone. Your situation is the result of your own naivety. I'm tired of repeating it, don't count on a man. Count only on yourself." Regina closed her eyes, trying not to cry right there in the street. Deep down, she knew this was typical of her mother, tough, pragmatic. But how she longed for just a drop of compassion. "Understood," she said curtly. "Thanks for the advice. I'll do my best." "Right," her mother replied. "I can't send you money, I barely have any myself. And I'm already supporting your cousin. But I did get the house fixed up, didn't I? Sebastian is helping, and you can take it from there. Maybe plant some vegetables. That way you'll have something to eat." Regina shook her head. Plant vegetables, the last thing on her mind right now. But arguing was pointless. "Okay, I got it. I'll go now. Everything's fine, don't worry." With that, she ended the call, feeling hollow inside. Slowly, she walked back to the country house with the bag of groceries, trying to process the conversation. Her mother was right in a way, self-reliance made sense. But Regina felt trampled, humiliated. She didn't need a lecture, just a warm word. But she knew her mother would never give her that. back home, she was alone. She turned on the small electric hot plate, boiled water in the new kettle, made oatmeal with water, had some tea, and began thinking about what to do next. First, I need to find a job. Otherwise, I won't last long here. I'll go see the head of the village, the elder. Ask if there are any vacancies. If not, I'll head to the district center, she thought, beginning to calm down. Life was tough, but she had to find a way forward. Since Sebastian wasn't coming until the day after tomorrow, Regina decided not to sit idle. She went to visit Aunt Paulina and knocked on her door. The woman was home and greeted her warmly. "Oh, come in, don't just stand there knocking," she called from the doorway. Inside, the house was warm and cozy, smelling of baked goods and herbs. Regina stepped into the small room and sat on a stool. "Listen, Aunt Paulina," she began shyly, "do you know if there's any work around the village or nearby? I really want to find something to earn at least a little. Maybe someone's looking for a shop assistant or administrator." Paulina frowned and began thinking. "Well, we've had a lot of businesses close down. There are a couple of stores, a private beer bar. I think the school needs a kitchen helper, but they pay very little. There's always the farm, but that's hard work. Still, if you have no other choice." Regina winced. A farm job meant backbreaking labor from dawn to dusk, and being a kitchen helper likely meant handing out food, probably barely enough pay to cover bus fare to town. But she didn't have many options. "What about the local administration?" she asked, hoping for something more suited to someone with management experience. Paulina shook her head. "Oh, dear, all those positions have long been filled. All their own people, and they're not planning on leaving. The only thing I can suggest is going to see Samuel Mendez, the head of the village. Maybe he knows of something in the area. Or better yet, head to the district center, there are more opportunities there." She sighed as she said it, clearly aware of how hard times were. Regina thanked her, drank the offered tea, and left. She decided to stop by the village office first. At the end of the street near the old club stood a small building with a crooked sign reading Village Administration. Samuel Mendez was a man in his 60s with a large belly and a kind face. He sat behind a cluttered desk. When Regina knocked and entered, he looked up with mild surprise. "How can I help you?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Regina politely introduced herself and explained she was staying at her mother's dacha. She asked if there were any job openings. Samuel listened and scratched his chin. "Miss, things are pretty bare around here. What do we have? A grocery store, a kiosk, a beer bar, the club, a tiny post office, the rest are private gardens. Then there's the school and the kindergarten. I'd love to help you, but there's just no vacancies. The farm's always looking for hands, though. But you know how that is, early mornings, milking cows and all." Regina sighed. "That's what I expected. What about the district?" "There's a small factory over there. They post job openings now and then. Or try the shopping center, they have turnover. But you'd have to commute by bus, and that's tough every day. You'd still need housing, and the bus doesn't run often." The picture was clear. Local opportunities were slim. Still, she didn't give up. She decided to try her luck in the district center. After thanking the village head, she walked to the bus stop. Unfortunately, the next bus to the center wouldn't arrive for another hour and a half. She had to wait under the blazing sun, then ride in an overcrowded bus. She had little money, but enough for the fare. Once there, she started visiting stores and offices, asking about openings. Most were already filled, or the pay was too low. She left her number a couple of times just in case, but no one sounded promising. Her skills as a manager weren't in high demand in a small town. Most places needed cashiers, cleaners, stock clerks. Government jobs were rare and hard to get. Everywhere it was either "we'll call you" or "we're not hiring." "Well, I'll try again tomorrow," she thought as she reached the bus stop. But then she learned that the return bus wouldn't leave for another 3 hours. So she wandered the town aimlessly until sunset, then finally got on the bus back. As she opened the gate at the dacha, she froze in surprise. Sebastian was there again, though he said he'd come only the day after tomorrow. His car was parked in the yard, and he was adjusting a pipe near the entrance. "Oh, hey," Regina called out. "What are you doing here?" He looked up and smiled. "Plans changed. I had a free window and figured I'd finish sooner so it doesn't drag on." "How are you holding up?" Regina sighed. "Barely. Job hunting is hard." Sebastian nodded knowingly, saying nothing. He showed her the new gas cylinder he'd brought. The old one was leaking. He'd also patched up the shed's roof. It was clear his efforts were improving the house, making it more livable. She felt grateful. He just did what needed to be done, no fuss. "You're probably tired from the trip. Go change, and I'll finish up here," he said. Regina went inside, thoughts racing. Sebastian's doing so much for me, and I can't even pay him. I'm broke. Yes, Mom is paying him, but maybe not for all this. He has to live too. When she came back, he was rinsing his hands with a garden hose. "Listen, Regina," he said suddenly, "I was thinking, a friend of mine owns a small car wash in the district center. His wife handles their bookkeeping. They sometimes need office help. I can ask if there's anything available." Regina perked up. "Yes, please do. I was there today and couldn't find anything suitable." "All right. I'll call him tomorrow. Hopefully, he won't mind. They don't have much turnover, but you never know." Regina felt a warmth inside, maybe, finally, a chance. She didn't care what kind of job it was, just something with a paycheck. Then maybe she could start saving, maybe even rent a room closer to town. "Thank you so much," she said, trying to catch his eye. "I don't know how to thank you enough." "No need," he said, waving it off with a smile. "We're practically neighbors." "Well, your mom and I are. But you deserve a hand getting back on your feet." They chatted a bit longer, and then Sebastian left, promising to return the next day or the day after with parts for the stove. Regina stood in the yard, listening to the engine fade away, and for the first time in a while, she felt like she could breathe a little easier. Her problems were far from over, but at least some people weren't turning their backs on her. A week passed. In that time, Sebastian had nearly finished all the urgent repairs. The fence was up, the roof no longer leaked, the house was cleaner, and there was now a faint but stable gas supply via the new cylinder. He even helped her hook up an old washing machine they found in the shed. Regina made a few more trips to the district center, but still no luck, no interviews, no calls. However, Sebastian said his friend mentioned that a bookkeeping assistant position might open in about a month. "If you want, wait for that," he said. "In the meantime, maybe look for something temporary." Regina decided to wait. She kept a routine, getting up early, cleaning, cooking simple meals. Sometimes she visited the shop, sometimes Aunt Paulina, with whom she had grown friendly. Paulina liked to chat, and it helped Regina stay out of her own head. Of course, the pain of Santiago's betrayal lingered. He hadn't called or written. She hadn't contacted him either, trying not to reopen the wound. Sometimes she caught herself missing their life together, but then the hurt and anger returned. She tried to drown it all in housework. One day, when Sebastian returned to drop off some building materials, he found Regina standing in the yard, crying. The night before, a mutual acquaintance from the city had called and told her that Santiago and his mistress were furnishing their apartment together and already making plans for their future. He was introducing her as his future wife. Regina's heart ached. Just yesterday she'd hoped he might come to his senses, feel guilty. But it seemed he was perfectly happy without her. What happened? Sebastian asked with concern as he came closer. Regina swallowed her tears, unsure how to respond. I don't want to burden him with my problems, she thought, but the pain inside her was fighting to break free. Just some news from the city. My husband has completely forgotten me and is apparently preparing for a new wedding, Regina whispered. Sebastian frowned, clearly understanding how much it hurt her. "Look, honestly, I don't know how to comfort you," he said. "But life goes on. If he did that to you, then he wasn't worthy of you." Regina sniffled, knowing he was only saying that to support her. But the pain was still raw. She looked at him and replied quietly, "I know you're right, but it's so hard to accept that everything I cared about is now in the past, and there's no way to get it back." "I understand," Sebastian nodded. "I've felt that way too, even if the situation was different. But one thing I know for sure, the pain fades with time. The important thing is not to get stuck in it. Just keep going. Think about it, you're only 27, your whole life is ahead of you." Regina watched him as he went to unload the trunk. She suddenly felt that Sebastian, too, had been through a lot, even though he didn't talk much about himself. There was a quiet weariness and determination in his eyes. She was curious about his story but didn't dare ask directly. Days passed, and Regina gradually adapted to life in the village. She started growing parsley and lettuce on a small plot, found some leftover seeds, and Aunt Paulina gave her tomato seedlings and often invited her over. These small joys began to lift her spirits, like watching the plants she'd planted grow in the evenings. Sebastian stopped by every 2 or 3 days, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to finish something. Regina felt a bit awkward. After all, most of the work was already done, and her mother likely wasn't paying for his continued visits. But he said he just passed by sometimes and figured he'd stop to see if she needed anything. She started to appreciate the attention. He brought little things, a bag of flour, a new shovel to replace a broken one. One evening, he arrived just before sunset, and they sat on a bench talking. The neighbors had gone away, and everything was quiet and peaceful. Regina talked about her childhood, how she used to spend time here when her mother was still cheerful and lighthearted. After a few failed relationships, her mother had become hard and cold. Sebastian listened, nodded, and occasionally shared a comment. "And you?" Regina finally dared to ask. "Why did you and your wife divorce, if it's not too personal?" Sebastian was silent for a while, seemingly recalling the details. "We got together too young," he began slowly. "I'd just gotten out of the army, found work at a factory, wanted to build a future. She got pregnant, so we got married. But it didn't take long to realize we weren't right for each other. Constant arguments, misunderstanding. I really did try to make it work, but eventually she packed up and moved back in with her parents, then filed for divorce. I didn't resist, there was no love left, and no point in dragging it out." "And your son?" Regina asked. "He stayed with her. But I visit him often and pay child support. He's not to blame for our mistakes." Regina nodded, realizing that many people's lives don't go smoothly. She also wondered if Sebastian was currently seeing anyone, but didn't want to ask outright. Still, the answer seemed to suggest itself. He was here often, helping her, never mentioned a girlfriend or wife. Maybe he's alone, she thought. Part of her still nursed the wound of betrayal and wasn't ready for anything new. But it felt nice to receive someone's attention and care. As it got later, Regina invited Sebastian to stay for dinner. He agreed, and they ate together under the dim kitchen light. A quiet conversation, simple food, and suddenly Regina felt almost cozy. It had been a long time since she felt such peaceful, domestic emotions. She was surprised how quickly things had begun to change. Not long ago, she thought her life was over, and now she was finding moments of contentment. When Sebastian got ready to leave, she walked him to the gate and smiled. "Thank you again. Without you, I'd be lost here." He looked her in the eyes. "You wouldn't be lost. You're strong. But call me if you need anything." They stood in a moment of tense silence. Regina felt her heart pounding, as if waiting for something more. But Sebastian simply stepped back, got in his car, and drove off. She remained there, watching him go. It made her a little sad, but also oddly light inside. A few days later, near the end of the month, Sebastian's friend called. There was an opening for an assistant bookkeeper at the car wash. Regina was invited for an interview. She was overjoyed. The next morning, she put on the nicest outfit she had left, took the bus, and headed to the district center. Nervous, she entered the modest building that housed the car wash's administrative office. A man in his mid-30s came out to greet her, introducing himself as Rodrigo. "Sebastian told me everything. Have a seat. Tell me about yourself." She sat down, trying to project confidence. She explained her degree, her experience handling documentation, her basic knowledge of office software. Rodrigo listened and nodded, then asked a few questions about schedule and salary expectations. "Look," he said finally, "the work isn't hard, but you'll be helping the accountant, handling some paperwork, answering calls, and keeping in touch with clients. The pay isn't great, but it's stable. We're a small business, but everything's legal. Hours are 9 to 6, Sundays off. Sometimes you might have to stay late at the end of the month for reports. Does that work for you?" Regina nodded. She couldn't be picky. It was much better than mopping floors or working on a muddy farm. "One thing, though," Rodrigo added. "We'd prefer someone who lives nearby. Sometimes we need someone on a weekend. Do you live in the district?" "Not yet," she admitted. "I live in a nearby village, but I consider moving if things work out. I can commute, it's just that the bus isn't always reliable." "All right, let's give it a try. We'll start with a 1-month trial. We'll see if it works for both of us." Regina smiled, barely containing her excitement. Finally, a chance to start earning. Rodrigo said she could start on Monday. She agreed. As soon as she left the office, she called Sebastian. "Hi, Sebastian. I got the job." She heard warm laughter on the line. "That's great. I told you Rodrigo's a good guy. He said you seemed trustworthy. I'm really glad for you." "Thank you," she said, her heart swelling with gratitude. "If it weren't for you, I never would have found out about it." "Oh, it's nothing. Celebrate a little, maybe we'll celebrate together sometime." "Maybe we will," she said softly, and began thinking of how she could thank him, maybe a dinner, a proper conversation without rushing. That same day, she returned to the country house, determined to start a new chapter. She had a job now, at least temporarily. The little house was slowly becoming a livable space. All that was left was to come to terms with her feelings for Santiago, or rather, the pain he had caused, and figure out her next steps. On her first day of work, Regina woke before dawn to catch the early bus. The ride to the district center took about an hour and a half, with many stops. By the time she arrived, she already felt a bit tired, but she pressed on, determined to do well. The office was small. Rodrigo, the head accountant, Olga, a young operator, and 2 car wash staff. Regina was greeted warmly overall, though Olga warned. "There's a lot of paperwork. It's meticulous work. I'll teach you everything, but ask questions if you're unsure. Mistakes cost us." Regina nodded, hiding how intimidated she felt. They seated her at a small desk with a computer and software. Olga showed her how to fill out reports, invoices, and contracts. It was overwhelming, but Regina took notes and pushed through. The first few days passed. She came home tired but proud to be earning even a little. The trial pay wasn't much, but if things went well, she'd get a proper salary. The only downside was the bus. It wasn't always convenient. Sometimes she had to wait hours. Once, when the bus never came, she had to call Sebastian, who came late in the evening to pick her up. That night in the car, they talked for a long time, listening to the hum of the engine. At one point, Sebastian said, "Maybe you should try renting a room in the city, so you don't have to travel so far." Regina gave a sad smile. "I'd love to, but the salary's small for now. I haven't saved anything yet. Renting would be too expensive." "I understand," he nodded. "But once the trial's over, maybe you'll manage." Or, worst case, if you need to stay the night, you can crash at my place. I've got a spare room. I live in the district. I travel a lot for work, so don't take it the wrong way. I'm just offering it as an option." Regina felt a knot tighten inside. The idea of staying over sounded comforting and frightening. She wasn't ready for anything intimate, but she knew he meant well. "Thank you," she said softly, looking out the window. "If it comes to that, I'll think about it." They fell silent as the car turned onto the country road. The headlights lit up wet pavement and bushes in the dark. At some point, Regina realized that being with Sebastian made her feel calm and safe, even though they hadn't known each other long. She wanted him to keep being around, but feared her own feelings, afraid of risking heartbreak again. A few more weeks passed. Regina found a steady rhythm. She woke early, commuted to work, came home in the evening. Sometimes she stayed late, but the bus usually came. She and Santiago no longer spoke. She only heard from acquaintances that he was now almost officially engaged to his new girlfriend. Her mother rarely called, mostly to ask if everything was fine or if anything urgent was needed at the house. Then the weekend came. Regina decided to throw a small celebration to mark 1 month at her new job and the fact that she was slowly getting back on her feet. She remembered Sebastian's comment about celebrating and called him. "Hi, Sebastian," she said, trying to sound upbeat. "I've got tomorrow off. Maybe you can come by in the evening? I'll cook something, we can sit and chat." She could hear background noise on the line. He must have been driving, but he quickly pulled over. "Hi, Regina. Of course I'll come, if I'm not intruding." "You're not," she said with a smile. "Come by around 7. Deal." She spent the entire next day cleaning and cooking. She bought some meat and vegetables at the store, made a light salad, and baked a pie, using a recipe from Aunt Paulina. She knew it wasn't a restaurant-level dinner, but she wanted to create a bit of comfort. By evening, she laid a tablecloth, an old one from her grandmother, but clean, and set the dishes. Sebastian arrived, just as promised, exactly at 7. He wore a dark shirt and jeans and held a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. Regina broke into a smile. "Wow, how beautiful. Thank you so much, come on in." He shyly handed her the flowers. "I just thought I shouldn't come empty-handed. They're simple, but from the heart." Regina placed the flowers in a jar. She didn't have a vase. Sebastian looked around. "Looks like you've really made the place cozy." They sat down at the table. Regina raised her glass. "Thank you for everything you've done, for helping me here, for telling me about the job. I truly appreciate it." Sebastian took a sip of the non-alcoholic wine Regina had found at the store and smiled. "I'm just glad things are working out for you. You didn't give up, and that's what matters." The evening flowed naturally. They laughed, reminisced about childhood. Turns out, Sebastian had spent some summers in the same village visiting relatives. At some point, Regina realized she hadn't felt this lighthearted talking to a man in a long time. Things with Santiago had been tense for years. Now, the conversation was easy and natural. When they stepped onto the porch to breathe the evening air, Sebastian gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you cold?" he asked. She shook her head. Inside, everything froze at his touch. It was both frightening and thrilling. She turned to face him, looking up. "Sebastian," she whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready for anything right now. Do you understand?" His eyes showed understanding. He nodded. "I'm not pushing. I'm just happy we're spending time together. We don't have to rush into love or a relationship. We both need time." Regina felt her heart tighten with gratitude and something warm and new. She gently leaned into him, feeling him wrap his arm around her shoulders. In that moment, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. People who wouldn't abandon her or cause harm. There were no guarantees, but in that moment, she wanted to believe in something better. They stayed on the porch, whispering, for a long time. When it got very late, Sebastian offered. I can stay the night, if that's okay. It's pretty late to drive. I'll sleep in the other room. You have a second bed, or a couch, right? Regina hesitated, then nodded. Yes, there was an old fold-out couch in the next room that could be used. And she didn't want him to drive into the dark night. All right, she said softly. They went inside and set up the couch. Sebastian took off his shirt, keeping his t-shirt on, and Regina brought him a pillow and blanket. When he lay down, she wished him good night and went to her room, feeling a pleasant excitement in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd felt this safe and warm. The night passed in a half-sleep, half-dreaming state, even though they were in separate rooms. In the morning, when Regina woke up, Sebastian was already in the kitchen, making tea. When he saw her, he smiled and said a soft good morning. And suddenly, she wished every morning could start like this. A new routine began to settle in. Regina worked during the day and occasionally saw Sebastian in the evenings. She couldn't invite him over all the time. He had his own life, and so did she. But gradually, they grew closer. Regina's mother, upon hearing that her daughter now had a job, simply said over the phone, "Good. That's how it should be. Just don't forget to pay the water and electricity bills." Regina sighed. "Got it, Mom." Santiago stayed silent. He never reached out. One day, Regina received a letter from a notary saying Santiago wanted to settle the division of property officially. She felt a chill, but didn't argue. She signed the papers giving up any claim to the apartment, which had been his anyway. In return, he agreed to let her keep some furniture, though she had no use for it and nowhere to put it. So it was over. 3 months passed. Regina was hired permanently as an assistant bookkeeper, and her salary increased. She could now afford to rent a place, but had grown attached to the country house. And Sebastian had even said, "Maybe we should do a proper renovation and live here. It's fine in summer, but for winter we'll need heating." Regina hesitated. The house was peaceful, but she wasn't sure she wanted to live in the village year-round. It was far from town. Still, Sebastian was enthusiastic, talking about installing a boiler, insulating the walls. One evening, as they sat on the same bench outside, Sebastian looked at the stars and said, "You know, I've been thinking, if we're good together, maybe we should consider living together officially. I'm not saying we get married tomorrow, but maybe we should start thinking about the future. I'm not pressuring you, Regina, I just think it's worth talking about." Regina's heart skipped. So soon? She thought. But then she realized enough time had passed, and she truly trusted him. Maybe this was the path forward. Yes, there were fears. What if she got hurt again? What if it didn't work out? But fate never asked permission to offer second chances. I'll think about it, she whispered, placing her hand over his. "I'm afraid of repeating old mistakes. But you're different. Thank you for being here." They fell silent. Then Regina added quietly, "You know, when I came here dragging those awful checkered bags, humiliated and broken, I didn't think anything good could happen to me again. But now, everything's different. I have a job, a roof over my head, plans. And you." Sebastian leaned in and kissed her forehead, a soft, almost timid gesture, but it filled her heart with warmth. They sat there until the clouds parted and moonlight lit the yard with a gentle glow. Regina felt the past slowly retreat and the future pulling her forward, all because, behind that rickety gate, someone had been waiting. Someone who offered her a hand and maybe a new kind of love. Time passed. Regina became more established at work. She and Sebastian would sometimes go into town on weekends, stroll through parks, visit cafes. She no longer dwelled on the pain Santiago had caused. She only regretted the lost years, her own naivete. But now, she had enough strength and confidence to say, "I'm starting over." One day, she received news that her mother was returning to town for a while. Apparently, the relative she'd been caring for no longer needed her, and she was looking for new work. Regina thought maybe now her mother would see how she lived and realize she'd become independent. Maybe they'd reconnect. But even if they didn't, Regina knew she could take care of herself. There was still plenty to do: repair the foundation, insulate the walls, install a stove. Maybe someday they'd move closer to the city if Regina could rent or buy a place. But it didn't feel as scary anymore. She had someone beside her who helped, supported, and appreciated her. Who would have thought that after being thrown out with mockery and contempt, Regina would find happiness right here, in a rundown little house behind a crooked gate? Because here, someone had been waiting. Sebastian. A man who made her feel needed and loved. Of course, there would still be a long road ahead: problems, arguments, everyday struggles. But Regina had learned the most important lesson: one person's betrayal is not the end of the world. There is always a way to get up and start again. And just because someone laughs at your pain doesn't mean the whole world has turned its back on you. There will always be someone willing to help. The key is not to give up and to keep living. And so, a tragic chapter in Regina's life came to an end, and a new one began. One full of difficulties, but also hope. Perhaps that's what growing up really is: when illusions fall away, but real support and genuine, if not immediate, love appear in their place.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.